Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Hi, it's Madeline Chassel. I'm the SBI Policy Director, and we have a call for you today that features a very special guest speaker. I'm hoping that she's in attendance already, but if not, we'll circle back. I want to introduce to you a speaker from the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, who's going to update us on their recent activity. Elizabeth Cassidy is the co-director for policy and research of the Commission. So Elizabeth, are you with us today? And if you've joined on the phone, just remember to press *6 to unmute yourself.
Madeline, hi, it's Elizabeth. I am on.
Hi, wonderful. There you are. So please take the floor and tell us all about the Commission and your recent activity. We're very glad to have you today, Elizabeth.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Madeline and Edwina as well for inviting me to join this call. I'm happy to have this opportunity. As mentioned, I work for the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is often referred to by its acronym USCIRF, USCIRF. And I'll just take a few minutes to explain who we are and what we do, and talk a little bit about our most recent annual report, and then I'm happy to take some questions. So USCIRF was created by an act of Congress, the International Religious Freedom Act in 1998. It's an independent, bipartisan federal advisory commission. So by independent, I mean we're not part of the State Department or the executive branch, although we are a U.S. government entity. We have 9 commissioners who are political appointees. And they are bipartisan, so they're appointed by either the White House, the leaders of the House, or the leaders of the Senate under a formula that works out so that 5 come from the party that holds the White House and 4 from the other party. Others are private citizens who serve as volunteers. They serve 2-year terms and can be reappointed once. And then the commission also has a full-time staff, of which I am one. There are currently 12 of us on the staff. And our role is advisory, as I mentioned, and under the statute, our mandates are monitoring and reporting on religious freedom conditions abroad, evaluating U.S. policy, developing policy recommendations, and public advocacy. Now, some of you may be familiar with our annual report, which comes out every year in the spring. You also may be familiar that the State Department also does an annual report on international religious freedom, and there's often some confusion about the two. Both of these reports were mandated by this same statute, the International Religious Freedom Act, but they are different. One major difference is the State Department reports on every country in the world. We at the Commission, we focus on around 30 to 35 countries usually, generally countries with the most serious issues. We are quite small, so we don't have the resources to report on every country in the world like the State Department does, and also it wouldn't make sense to have 2 reports that were so similar. In addition, a difference between our report and the State Department's is that our report also analyzes U.S. policy and makes extensive policy recommendations, both on a country-by-country basis for the countries that we cover, as well as overall U.S. international religious freedom policy, so the implementation of this law, the International Religious Freedom Act. We also, in addition to the annual report, over the course of the year, we put out other publications, press releases, articles, op-eds, reports, and everything is available on our website. We report publicly, so if you're interested, I'd urge you to go to our website, which is uscirf.gov. In terms of the types of countries we cover, another thing that the Act did, the International Religious Freedom Act did, is it created a statutory category that it calls countries of particular concern, abbreviated as CPCs. And this, under the Act, is for countries where the governments perpetrate or tolerate particularly severe religious freedom violations. And then there's some elaboration in the Act of what that means, but essentially it's very severe violations, including torture, killing, detentions, things like that. And under the Act, the State Department is supposed to designate every year the countries that it finds meet that standard, and we are supposed to recommend to the State Department the ones that we think should be designated. So in addition to 2 reports, you also have 2 CPC lists, which can be somewhat confusing as well, because we and the State Department don't agree on all of the countries. So right now, as of mid-2016, the State Department has 10 countries that it has designated as countries of particular concern, and USERF agrees with the designation of all of those countries. Those are Burma, China, Eritrea, Iran, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. The newest one on that list is Tajikistan, which was just designated for the first time by the State Department earlier this year. We at the Commission have identified 7 more countries that we feel meet that standard, but are not currently designated by the State Department, and those are Central African Republic, Egypt, Iraq, Nigeria, Pakistan, Syria, and Vietnam. And then, as I mentioned, we have a number of other countries that we cover in our report where the conditions don't meet that most severe standard, but are sufficiently serious that we feel the need to report on them and make recommendations. In this year's report, we covered around 35 countries. And then just to highlight some of the sort of main countries and issues featured in our report this year. Some sort of trends we saw. We saw a deteriorating situation in a number of countries. In terms of government persecution, we saw it significantly worsening in countries including Iran, Russia, and Tajikistan over the past year. As I mentioned, Tajikistan is the one that the State Department most recently designated as a CPC. Additionally, a major problem for religious freedom around the world is the actions of non-state actors, including violent non-state actors. And so in a number of countries that we report on, it's non-state actors that are the primary perpetrators of the egregious violations. So this would include countries like Iraq, Syria, and Nigeria, and groups operating there. This year, in this year's report, we also, and this has been a concern over the past few years, we flagged a concern over increasing societal intolerance in Western Europe against Muslims and Jews, and particularly in the past year against Muslims, including increased reports of discrimination, harassment, and sometimes even violence. In terms of some of the overarching issues that we report on, there are a number of types of laws that often result in severe religious freedom violations in various of the countries we covered. This would include registration laws, meaning laws where religious groups are required to register with the government to operate, and in many parts of the world these are quite onerous and restrict the ability of individuals and groups to practice their faith. Another major issue is extremism laws, anti-extremism laws, laws that define extremism without requiring the advocacy or use of violence, and therefore are used against peaceful individual groups. A lot of these types of laws feature particularly in countries like Russia and Central Asia. And another major issue, which I know many of you are familiar with because I know that your groups are advocating against them as well, are violations that result from blasphemy laws. Those have been a major focus for many years, and we've seen increased enforcement of blasphemy laws in a number of countries in the past few years, including Egypt. So those are some of the major points we had this year. I don't want to take up too much time speaking myself. I know you have a lot on your agenda, but I'm happy to take some questions if there's time for that, Madeline.
There absolutely is, Elizabeth, and for those of you just joining us, we do have a good crowd today. We have Elizabeth Cassidy from the International Religious Freedom Commission, and she is letting us know what they have been up to and telling us about their report. the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. I know that our CEO, Edwina Rogers, would love to probably direct some questions with you, Elizabeth, so let me see if we have her on the call. Edwina, are you there?
Sure. Yes. Yes, I'm here, of course. Great. Thank you for that overview, Elizabeth. Just a couple of questions I know that a lot of us have, and then we'll open it up for everyone else. So you talked about your materials and that you have other publications and research reports that come out throughout the year other than your big one that came out in April, and that they're on your website and they're public. But do you have any kind of push database that people can sign up for to get alerts when those become available, like a listserv that we can go and sign up for? We do, and I should have. Thank you for asking that, because I should have mentioned that. You can, if you go on our website, you can sign up. There's a sign up spot, and that will put you on the list for all of our mailings. So you'll get an email when we issue a press release or issue a report, or when we're having an event. We host briefings and hearings and things like that. So please, anyone who's interested, we welcome your signing up and reading our reports and coming to our events.
Okay, thank you about that. And so just maybe a little bit more about this interesting public policy implementation side that you guys have been charged with, in addition to just gathering information and writing the reports, but also making recommendations, and then hopefully, sort of following through that they're carried out. So, like, for example, if the president was in China meeting with the leader there, would he have in his briefing papers from you guys and the State Department a list of the violations, and try to have that on the table for any type of bilateral negotiations? And would that be the same process with other countries?
Well, we do try to get our recommendations in materials like that as often as we can. We do work closely with the State Department. As I mentioned, the State Department also does international religious freedom, and under this act, a sort of parallel office to us was created within the State Department, the International Religious Freedom Office. And they're probably our closest contact at state, although we deal also with the regional bureaus a good bit. They're in the Bureau of Human Rights, Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And so we do often, they communicate with us a lot, and we do send information to them. And so when a trip is coming up, yes, we often will prepare, here's our report, here's some other things that we'd love for you to include in the President's briefing book. So we hope it's getting in there.
Okay. What about over on the House and the Senate side? How do you guys get your information to Congress?
We do liaise extensively with Congress. We have a person on staff who's our director of government relations and communications, and so we go and meet with offices, both. We seek out offices and they seek out us. We also do a lot of briefings for congressional staff on issues we're working on, countries we've just traveled to, whatever it may be. So those are sort of main ways. We testify before Congress as well. In fact, our recently elected chair is going to be testifying just in a week or so before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. That's one of the entities that's most interested in these issues. So often, one that we work quite closely with.
Okay, and then my final question, and we can open it up to everyone else. So I see you've got the executive branch covered, and you've got the U.S. Congress covered. What about all the embassies in Washington, where every country has their representation here? Do you ever coordinate with them or speak to them, or maybe try to advocate a certain position with them, especially with the countries that are on your priority list of concerns, or is that left up to other government officials, maybe over in the executive branch?
We do interact with a number of embassies. Some are more willing to interact with us than others, but like you say, the real bilateral diplomacy is done by the State Department. We don't represent the executive branch, as I mentioned, so we never hold ourselves out as saying this is a position of the U.S. government that we're advocating. We're talking about our own recommendations. Some countries, every year we do, as we're starting our annual report process, we do send a letter to every embassy in Washington of a country that was in our report the previous year, telling them that we're starting our annual report process, this is who we are and what we do, and if there is any information you would like to share with us for our consideration in our report, please do send it and tell them, send it by a particular date. And some embassies do send us information and some don't. So we do seek out the government's position if they're interested in conveying it. And then we do obviously widely publicize our report, including sending it to embassies. And we hear from some and not others, and we in particular hear from some that really don't like our report much at all. Some of the governments speak publicly that they don't like our report much at all. But so we do have some engagement with certain embassies, although, like I said, not the level of engagement that the State Department would have with a foreign government.
Great. Well, fascinating work you guys do. So back to you, Madeline, and you can see if anyone else has any questions.
Thank you. I know that we already do have some questions. So Hugo, if you are able to unmute yourself, please go ahead and ask your question. Hugo? There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are.
Hello?
Hi, Hugo.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to ask a question to Ms. Cassidy about the Parliamentary Coalition to Advance Religious Freedom, which I read in your webpage that you helped put up in 2004. And I'm a bit concerned because there is a letter that's been sent to the Pope in order to ask for his participation, or for him to set up the such a commission, which is something a bit strange because the Holy See is not a member of the United Nations, and it's not the most friendly organization in terms of respecting the rights of non-believers or promoting how to say diversity of religion, diversity of thought in countries where they are a majority. And especially one of the signatories of the letter is a senator from Argentina, who's the person who put in the new civil code the status of persona to frozen embryos. So it's really strange to read this, and I would like to be enlightened on why writing to the Pope, or why supporting this sort of action in terms of ensuring religious freedom. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, there is a emerging parliamentary coalition on freedom of religion or belief. Started actually in 2014, not 2004. I think you said 2004. And USCIRF has been supportive of those initial efforts in the interest of having more voices advocating for freedom of religion or belief for everyone. And to be a member of the parliamentary coalition, the parliamentarians have to agree to Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, as I'm sure you all know, is a right for every individual to believe or not to believe, and to manifest those beliefs in public or private. But that doesn't mean. But USCIRF is not. We're not parliamentarians, so we're not a part of that network. We've attended some of the conferences that they've had, and actually I'm not familiar with this letter to the Pope. I know that they have done letters to governments raising religious freedom issues, for including Burma, Sudan, Vietnam, I believe, Pakistan. But I had not realized that they did a letter to the Pope or who did that. One thing about that network is it's essentially it's an informal network of these parliamentarians, and they don't speak as an organization. So whatever letter they do, it's done by the parliamentarians who sign on to that. So any letter, whether it's to the Pope or to the government, is from those parliamentarians. It doesn't represent anybody who did not sign on to it.
Thank you.
Do we have it?
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
I just sent the link. I just sent the link of the letter, which is it's published in the web page of the commission. Thank you anyway.
It's published. It's not on the commission's website. It might be on the Parliamentary Coalition's web. They're a different entity than we are, but I'm happy to take a look at the letter.
Good. Yes, I just, Hugo, I just took your link that you'd shared with us and shared it with the whole group. Hopefully that will help. And hopefully we've controlled the quick noise issue we had also. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question of Ms. Cassidy?
Yes, my name is Jason Frye. Ms. Cassidy, quick question. How often do you take recommendations from NGOs and civil society actors such as the Secular Policy Institute? Because one of the things that we do is we look at the news, we monitor religious freedom issues on a regular basis, and often we'll send out letters. So how likely is it to take into account advice from our organization, for example, for particular countries of particular concern, including the Tier 1 that are not designated by the State Department in Tier 2?
It's a great question. Thank you. And we liaise a lot with NGOs and welcome information from groups that are working on these issues, both sort of information that different groups are gathering of the situation on the ground for different communities in the various countries we cover, and also ideas for recommendations. So we're happy to have that kind of information. You can find out how to contact us through our website. There's a general email address as well as the staff email information. And I don't know if one way we liaise with a lot of groups is if you're based in Washington, D.C., there's an International Religious Freedom Roundtable of NGOs that work on these issues that meets every couple of months, and we participate in the parts of those meetings where the representatives from the State Department, USCIRF, and members of Congress come and sort of speak with groups. But the short answer is very happy to have information from NGOs. We're a really small staff. As I mentioned, we're 12 people, but on the policy and research side, so the people who do the monitoring and the reporting, there are only 7 of us. So so we really do need the assistance and reinforcement by NGOs.
Thank you so much.
Well, good. I think that we have satisfied those who had any pressing questions. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. I will ask Edwina one last time if there's any follow-up that you have or any further inquiries for Ms. Cassidy.
No, just a big round of applause and appreciation. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It was very informative, and we look forward to working more closely. And I'm sitting here reading the report right now, and we sent out a link to everybody. And of course, when it came out, we announced that in our weekly newsletter, in our daily clips. So thank you. We appreciate your time today.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I really enjoyed it. It was great questions, and I look forward to working with all of you. So take care and enjoy the rest of your call.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Well, good. That was a very informative start to our call, and we do have plenty of participants left to continue the discussion. So I'm going to ask, I know that we had a last minute update via email from John Kerbow, and if you are in attendance, I believe you are, and you want to just give a quick update to the conference on your activities with Muslimish and the other projects with mass media, etc., please take that time now and go for it. So, John, are you with us? I know you are.
Excellent, great. Yeah, so I'll just be really quick here. So, the Muslimish conference was on the 18th of December of July. It was in New York City, and it was an absolutely wonderful conference and extremely meaningful and moving. And one of the things they talked about was the need for more support by the secular world in how we can give dissidents and secularists and free thinkers more of the tools to get their message out, and also possibly find ways to give them more protection. So, for example, and I've talked about this before, but you have people coming out that could use cybersecurity, that could use physical security, that could use legal aid and things like that. But we also want ways to find support for mass media and messaging and counter narratives, people with and organizations that can support ways to disseminate the message they have about free thinking and human rights, and even within Islam reform, through mass media and through crafting messages through various forms of media. You know, how do you create a program for an iPhone that can show people how to argue for secularism to fellow Muslims? How do you find ways through social mass media to support the message of somebody speaking out against theocracy, things like that? So to have a counter narrative that can sort of compete with the alternatives of, you know, Islamism and extremism on the one hand, and authoritarian governments on the other. And then, you know, people like Faisal call this the secular caliphate. It's, you know, jokingly, but it's the idea that we need a secular counter narrative that is not only can sit well with moderate Muslims, but can also really mobilize the secularists and the free thinkers. Now, the second thing is that what I've done, and I can send anybody an email who wants to follow up on this. I'm putting together a kind of a Google Drive or a Yammer collaboration space digitally, where any organization that's worked with dissidents before, for example, that's worked with bloggers in Bangladesh, I think is a good example, that has already done things like this, that's already helped provide legal aid or cybersecurity or some kind of support, you know, they can share the practices that already work. At the same time, they can list the needs they have and the things that they still run into as problems. For example, here's what we can do, but here's what we also need. And I think we get enough organizations together doing this, we can then add a third component to this, which would be new ideas and tools that we can add to the toolkit. And we can specifically do this from several domains, from the domain of cybersecurity and cyber platforms. You know, how can we download stuff that anyone in the world can train themselves and share with fellow free thinkers? You know, space to collaborate and talk and to avoid being hacked and leaked by jihadi counter bloggers and stuff like that. You know, the other, you know, another domain would be physical security and protection. That's a longer conversation. We still got to kind of brainstorm that between different groups. But the idea would be that we can provide, you know, physical security and extraction. We just have to find out the legal and ethical way to do it in a way that's robust and responsive and can be done in real time with funding already set aside and money already raised. It's a tough challenge, but I think we can find a couple pilot programs to try to show that can work. So the next time someone like Ayan Hirsi Ali comes out and speaks, we're not going to have to run around and scramble to try to fundraise and wait for, you know, ages on end before anyone answers the call. A third thing would be strategic media and mass messaging. You know, strategic mass communication, people with backgrounds in media and psychology and kind of ways to craft messages effectively through various forms of media that can amplify the messages of these dissidents. So just those three things: cyber, physical security, and strategic mass communication. People from those backgrounds can come together and then add those skill sets to this working group. And I think the first step is I'm going to add anyone to these share folders or these this kind of Yammer space or Google Document Drive, however people want to set this up. There's a couple options. I think Yammer is good, but I think Google Documents are good as well. And then we can kind of start an informal roundtable, and this is just a completely voluntary, self-organizing effort. Anyone's thoughts would definitely help, and anyone's experience would help. So that's the main update for the project to support secular freethinker movements in the Islamic world, as well as Islamic reform movements. Another quick thing is if anybody has experience with developing apps, like phone apps, and also if people have backgrounds in, say, philosophy, Socratic discussion, logic, things like that, what we're trying to do here, another idea is to create a kind of app for, could be for a phone, for a computer, for something like that, that can show Muslims, how to argue for theocracy to counter the common arguments that Islamists make. So, for example, you can use very non-confrontational, friendly conversations to show fellow Muslims why their lives are better off as Muslims living in a free secular society. That the word secular doesn't necessarily mean corrupt Western dictator. It doesn't have to mean that everyone's going to embrace rampant sexual immorality. Those are the things people often auto-associate with the word secular in the Middle East because of decades of propaganda and colonialism and stuff like that. So better ways to argue for secularism in ways that are friendly to moderate Muslims, or even the word moderate is pretty vague, but to liberal Muslims, who can then argue with some of their more conservative counterparts at the dinner table, at the university, etc. I'll update more on that, and if you want a current example, there's something called Street Epistemology by a guy named Peter Boghossian, who developed an app for this. That's more about having conversations directly about religion with believers. This would be focused on something else, but it would be kind of the same concept. So, and I guess the last thing is that the project about bringing reason and scientific thinking into American politics, I actually am working with some friends here in New York. We did our first show. It's called The Firebrands. And my friend Lee is actually editing and getting this all ready to go. And it's the first podcast about an hour long. We talk about Islam, we talk about reform within the left, and how we can be better at supporting human rights, and we're pretty excited about it. We will send that to you guys as soon as we get done editing, and I think the next one we're going to do is going to be on the role of the public understanding of science and public policy and how we can better communicate that and debate it and stuff like that. So, yeah, we're stoked about that, and I'll keep people posted on the Reason Revival project, as I've talked about. So, yeah, I guess that's all. So, thanks.
I just wanted to add, it said when it was very nice to meet you in New York at the Muslimish conference on June the 18th, and we really appreciate all of your excellent ideas. I'm taking notes here. I could hardly keep up with the flow, but thank you for putting it in writing, and it's certainly much needed. We get 4, 5, 6 emails every day through our website from people who are in harm's way, in Sudan and Pakistan and Iraq and Afghanistan and Iran and places like that, and they're looking for any advice or resources so they can just, try to survive or get out. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, John. Hopefully we'll hear more from you next month. And in the meantime, of course, you'll loop some of us in via email. Jason, if you are available, we would love an update from Jason Frye. He distributes and composes many, if not all, of our sign-on letters and our advocacy campaigns. So please update us on the most current activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. So I came up with a few letters over the past few weeks, and I have a couple updates over a few things that we've done advocacy letters on so far. I guess the first aspect of my part of the presentation will be on the updates to previous letters that we sent out. Firstly, and I think this is absolutely incredible, we put out a letter to the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, on HB2, which was this abortion omnibus bill, and it was it was heavily surrounding what's called TRAP laws, targeted regulations for abortion providers. I believe that's what it stands for. Um, so the TRAP laws out there, what they do is they call for extended waiting periods. They call for physicians performing abortions to have admitting privileges the same day at a hospital within 30 miles. And what happened after HB2 came into being was Texas lost over half of its abortion clinics. And this ended up going to the Supreme Court. And in Roe versus Wade, what the court said was that they wanted maximum safety to be a factor involved with people requesting and pursuing abortion services. And then 2 decades later, in another Supreme Court case, they said that the states can, though the states can regulate abortion services, they cannot substantially burden those seeking abortion services. And Justice Breyer the other day in Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt came out saying that those particular regulations um, they didn't have a logical basis for what they were seeking, and they presented a substantial burden. So the Supreme Court struck down that particular aspect of that law. So though we wrote a letter to the governor of Texas, the Supreme Court already took care of that situation before Texas did any type of action. On top of that, we put out a previous letter on another HB2. This was in North Carolina, and the Justice Department is asking the judge in the case to invalidate that particular quote-unquote bathroom law that has additional implications for other local civil rights ordinances to protect LGBT people. So in terms of new material, there were a couple letters this last month that we put out on LGBT related issues. The first was on Colombia. In Colombia, they decriminalized homosexuality quite a number of years ago. And there has been a bit of progression, slowly but surely, for full social and civil equality for gays and lesbians. A couple of years ago, in 2013, the Constitutional Court came out saying that gays and lesbians deserve full partnership recognition, and it had given the Colombian Congress 2 years to come up with some semblance of recognized status for same-sex partners. And they failed to do so. So the Constitutional Court in Colombia, they declared marriage equality. And now we have couples getting married, same-sex couples getting married in Colombia. We sent a congratulatory letter to the country. And on the reverse side, a tragedy took place in Orlando. Everyone knows what happened. And we sent a letter off concerning that. And it was a horrific situation. I also penned a letter, and it's still being edited, I assume. It's on reasonable gun regulation. In the United States, we have a significant problem, a terrible and significant problem. Last year, fatalities from gun violence passed that of auto accidents. In the United States, every time that we've had a noticeable problem from gun violence, we have acted in a reasonable and decisive manner, from dealing with the gun violence relating to prohibition to dealing with gun violence after President Kennedy, Attorney General Kennedy, and Martin Luther King were shot to dealing with gun violence. And this was handgun violence after James Brady and Ronald Reagan were shot. And then after a school shooting in Stockton, California, we acted again. And now we have a mass shooting that's defined as more than 4 people getting shot practically every day in this country. And we're doing nothing. We're essentially doing nothing. Congress, after the Orlando shooting, both Republicans and Democrats entered 2 respective amendments on gun control, and those 4 amendments, none of them passed. We're in a country where, beyond this, in 1996, there was what was called the Dickey Amendment. Jay Dickey, a former representative from Arkansas, entered in an amendment to the omnibus spending bill that the CDC had its funding cut for, not only cut for research for gun violence, the causes and measures to deal with the effects, but that they could not do any research based upon that could potentially promote gun control. And after the Sandy Hook shooting, President Obama ordered $16 million to be used in order to study gun violence. Representative Dickey, in an interview with the Huffington Post recently, said that he regrets entering that amendment to the omnibus spending bill and wishes that we could have continued doing research. With the 2013 report that was commissioned in 2013 report from President Obama said not only the human cost, but in 2010 there were $174 billion in costs relating to firearms violence in the United States. And this is a country where we have hundreds of toddlers shooting people every year. We need reasonable gun policy in this country, and the Congress is not acting in accordance with what the American people want. So this letter is currently being edited. Hopefully you'll see it soon. But I'm rarely at a loss for words, but this situation puts me at a loss for words. Beyond this, internationally, in Pakistan, there was one terrific law that was passed in Punjab province that there's been talk about making it national, but there is some resistance from a rather influential advisory government body. In 1961, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan implemented a government body called the Council on Islamic Ideology. They have merely an advisory role, but they have a substantially influential advisory role. And we came out with a letter a while ago on child marriage in Pakistan, and we connected with an organization that was founded in 2011 called Girls Not Brides. With that particular situation, even before the founding of Pakistan, in 1924, there was a particular law called the Child Marriage Restraint Act, and that raised the age of consent for boys to 18, girls to 16. And there was a particular amendment to that was proposed in the National Assembly that would have raised the age of consent from girls to 18 as well. But the Council on Islamic Ideology released its recommendations, and the Standing Committee on National Religious Affairs killed that particular bill. Well, in Punjab province in Pakistan, they decided to take on the issue of violence against women. Most particular domestic violence against women. Human Rights Watch did a report several years back saying that in Pakistan, 70 to 90% of women have been the victims of domestic violence in that country. These particular instances of violence include honor murders, acid attacks, etc., etc. And as such, Punjab province came out with a particular piece of legislation aimed at protecting women that called for the government in that province to set up crisis centers, toll-free hotlines to call in. It protects women against getting fired or kicked out of their houses if they report domestic violence. It has stricter penalties for the perpetrators of these acts. And there's talk about taking this nationally. And as we would expect, the Council on Islamic Ideology came out with a recommendation on this. And we put out a letter on this particular recommendation, being critical, outright condemning this recommendation and promoting that the Prime Minister of Pakistan promote protections for women against domestic violence rather than prescribe domestic violence. And why I say prescribe domestic violence is because this 75-page report from the Council on Islamic Ideology, what it called for was for women who, for wives who their husbands have felt have been disobedient, when they're fed up, they're instructed to lightly strike their wives to instill fear. This, of course, is both cultural and religious. There's plenty of passages in the Quran that condemn violence, but one in particular in Book 4, verse 34, says that for a disobedient wife who the husband finds may be arrogant, the last resort is to strike her. And so that's what this is based in. So the letter that I penned on this particular incident, this particular report, like I said, condemns these particular recommendations. There's some small incidental aspects to the report that call for, protecting women, but it's more heavily egregious. So that letter has been put out. And then I also penned a letter based upon that wonderful caller that we had on our previous last month's international conference call from Representative Bobby Scott's office, and that relates to the Do No Harm Act, and that will be going out soon. Essentially, it's like this, just a 30-second overview. We have a conflicted history of defining religious liberty in the United States. The Supreme Court oftentimes will go and define what that is, and Congress will go back and legislate. Initially, this was relating to polygyny and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court in 1878 said that when you put your religious doctrine before the law of the land, the Constitution, you are to make yourself a law unto yourself. And then we go forward, and then we have issues of unemployment insurance, da-da-da-da-da-da, and then we get this thing called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Well, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, initially, the intent was promoted to protect the freedom of conscience of individuals from the government. There's a lot of issues involved with that, and we could go on for hours about that. However, what this has turned into, because of other cases that have come after that, it's become a tool that individuals can sidestep civil rights law, the Violence Against Women Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act against other individuals. This has expanded to states, and it's gone more than just government versus the people. It can be the people versus the people. And the Do No Harm Act seeks to remedy that. It seeks to alter a small portion of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 in order to fix a lot of the problems. It won't necessarily fix it at the state level, because in 1997 the U.S. Supreme Court decreed that the 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act only applies to the federal government. That's why we see all the state laws, but those state laws also reference the 1993 law. So in essence, in Texas, the Supreme Court promoted the rights, the reproductive freedom. On top of that, the Justice Department is taking on these discriminatory laws in North Carolina. Those are aligned with the letters we put out. On top of that, we thank Columbia for promoting human dignity and preserving equality. And then we gave our condolences and expressed our regrets for what happened in Orlando. We're promoting and we're pushing for reasonable gun laws. On top of that, we are promoting laws to protect women from domestic violence and give a reasonable recourse in Pakistan. And we're advocating for the rightful amendment to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to secure good secular policy, so people can't just say, I don't want to follow that law, I don't have to follow that law, it doesn't matter if everyone else has to follow that law. If the law is there and it's neutral and generally applicable, you got to follow it. So that's my report. I tried to make that as brief as possible so we can take questions before the end of this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason. I do want to open up the floor to any questions for Jason. If anyone would like to ask anything, and of course, Edwina, if you have some guidance for us, please speak up.
Hi, it's Edwina, yes. So the letter that you just heard about that Jason described concerning violence against women in Pakistan, that letter is going to be going out today. It's already. And then the other two letters that he mentioned that haven't gone out yet, they'll be going out in the next few days. And I have an announcement that I want to make, and then we'll see if anyone else has any questions for Jason. And I wanted to let everybody know that Jason Frye is our new COO at Secular Policy Institute, and you can see why. He is doing an excellent job and most knowledgeable on all kinds of secular issues around the globe. And I just want to take a second here to say a little bit about his background. He has been an activist in secular issues for 13 years, and he has served as the president for the Humanist Association of San Diego, and also he chairs the Executive Council for the American Humanist Association Chapter Assembly, and he's a board member of the Humanist Society, and he is also the first coordinator of the LGBT Humanist Council, which is now the LGBTQ Humanist Alliance. And he is a humanist celebrant and has performed many ceremonies, and he has a degree in political science and religious studies from University of California, Irvine, and he's wrapping up his master's in political science and public policy this summer at San Diego State University there in San Diego. So thank you, Jason, for agreeing to this new position, and we'll be doing an announcement in the newsletter and a little press release, and we've gotten everything sorted on the website. So I will I'll pause, and Madeline, you can see if anyone has any questions or, more importantly, some new issues for us to get on and for Jason to work on. I have one, and I'll be emailing you about this, Jason. A group in New York State, ultra-Orthodox Jewish men are filing complaints and looking for help with regard to gender discrimination and other discrimination. They are forced into 10, 12 hours a day of religious study, and they don't get other types of science or English or language or math, just religious study, and then they, graduate from their high schools that their family sent them to, and they can't get into any universities, and they don't really know anything outside of their religious studies. So they're starting to push back, and it's sort of a fascinating issue. And I look forward to hooking you up with the leader of that group so that we can offer them some assistance with drafting and research. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Madeline.
Well, that's wonderful news. Congratulations, Jason. And if anyone has any questions, that's what we'll leave you with. Otherwise, we will. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yes,
this is John Kerbo. I had a quick question for Jason. I was wondering if, in this effort to help women in Pakistan, do you ever run into problems from a PR angle or from trying to get support or fundraise? Do you ever run into issues of people talking about, cultural relativism, colonialism, saying we shouldn't interfere with another culture? And these are, hopefully you don't get these arguments, but if you do run into these as an obstacle, I was just wondering about that. If that's the case, there's a lot of really good responses from local Pakistanis and expats from Pakistan that, especially women, that speak really eloquently on this, including a blogger named Iana, who's done some amazing. She wrote like this sort of an open letter to Ben Affleck after the Sam Harris Ben Affleck discussion on TV about the need for people in the West to have conversations about Islam and to stand up for the minority within the minority and stuff like that. And there's a lot of good people that can lend support to that. If you do run into that issue, I was wondering about that though.
Yes, I can address this real quick. Is that by Hina Databoy, the one you're referring to?
She's actually anonymous. She just goes by the moniker Iana. Nice Mangoes is her Twitter handle. She's former Pakistan. She's Pakistani. She's a Canadian blogger currently. But she grew up in
yes.
South.
There's a blogger who does speaking on the West Coast in California specifically, who's also Pakistani descended, named Hina Databoy. I haven't encountered any resistance from fundraising or calls for cultural relativism, criticisms from that. When I write these letters, I try to avoid that type of Western colonial type of speak. I cite not just what we would consider Western Enlightenment imperialism. What I tend to do is I tend to highlight what's going on in the area. On top of that, where I cite criticism for particular laws, and that are the Constitution of the country itself, international covenants. The two that I always use are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Oftentimes, I'll use the CEDAW, the Covenant on the Elimination for all forms of discrimination against women, which Pakistan is a member to. So when I deal with international issues, I don't just say the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. What I'll do is I'll say your country has been a party to this particular international covenant, because secularism is far more than just a product of the West. For example, in Indonesia, they have a form of cultural Islam called Pancasila, and in Pancasila Islam, I might be butchering that particular, it might be Pancasila, but in Pancasila Islam, they say Islam yes, Islamic government no. In Turkey, of course, we have issues right now with the Prime Minister trying to destroy the variety of secular culture they have in Turkey. But in Turkey, Islam is considered a matter of just a personal conscience mindset, as opposed to a government intrusion for a high degree. So when we work with these issues, what we do, and I know that we're on a time crunch, when we work with these issues, we look at the cultural factors of the area. We look at also what the international consensus has been on human rights, because it's not primarily dominated by the West. This is what a lot of people around the world have contributed to, and I think that we should get in contact after this call, and we should discuss this and this is actually, I guess, as the new COO, this would be a really good opportunity to come up with some essays for the website to talk about the aspects of secularism. Is it just a Western imperialist aspect?
I'm actually finishing a short book on that, about sort of like Sam Harris talks about the moral landscape, and then people talk about change within Islam has to come from the people in the country and the culture. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm finishing a short book on this. I'd love to get in contact and
Yeah,
have some
and
thoughts on that.
there and there's one particular scholar who I think is really important as a voice in all of this. He's Dr. Ahmet Kuru. He's a Muslim himself. He's a Turk, and he also writes on secularism in the Islamic world, and he's incredibly vital as a voice in this particular dialogue. Just one small correction in my accomplishments that I'm blushing over Edwina mentioning. I'm not currently on the Humanist Society board, and the chapter assembly was in existence years ago, but I was involved with both of them and both on their boards. On top of that, I wanted to give a personal thanks to our caller earlier, Miss Cassidy, because the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom does amazing work. I recommend everyone to go to their website, and I recommend that you read their material on what is called Prisoners of Belief. We didn't have time to put it out, but I also penned a letter expressing our support for refunding the commission because, like I said, it also they're highly critical of situations where people are penalized for not just minority religious opinion, but where religion and government get entwined and for authoritarian purposes, people are penalized both civilly and criminally for expressing doubt. Like in Saudi Arabia, for example, where if you express even a question of the existence of God, you'll be charged with breaking allegiance with the ruler. So thank you so much. Those were some really good questions. We'll connect on this, and hopefully we can have a good dialogue online, and I think it'll be incredibly useful because the work you're doing is absolutely wonderful, and yes, you were absolutely correct. In a lot of places in the Muslim world, secularism is seen as an intrusive, imperialistic vehicle for the West to come in and destroy local culture. For example, in Pakistan, in certain areas, they have killed people coming in to give polio vaccines because it's said that the administrators from the UN of the polio vaccine are just participants in a Western conspiracy to make Muslim men sterile. So these are incredibly important topics that we need to cover. And our time is running short, unfortunately, and it's always good to leave them wanting more, and it's always, there's plenty of work to do, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing. We will connect with this. Peace.
All right. So, Madeline, I just have two quick announcements. It'll take about 15 seconds. One, I got an email from Sabrina Dent, and she's with the Religious Freedom Center at the News Museum Institute in Washington, D.C., and she wanted us to let everybody know that they're enrolling now for their fall classes, which they have plenty of classes on religious freedom issues. And these are classes that are sort of post-degree type study. And they'll be coming on our call speaking in September. Also, Richard Baldwin down at Gulf Coast University, he's looking for a speaker for next spring on secular issues. And if anyone's interested in that, please send me an email and I'll do an introduction. So our next call is the first Thursday in September. We do not have calls in August, December. Nobody's around. So September the 1st, we'll be back. And we already have 2 or 3 very important speakers lined up for that call. So over to you, Madeline, and we'll sign off.
Well, that's all I was going to say. So we are done for the day. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you in September.